So I'm glad to present to you NEI General Contracting team, starting with Sean Henry, who will be presenting today along with some of his colleagues. Sean is project manager with NEI. He is a certified passive house builder. He is a Vermont Passive House board member and leading the NEI Vermont office. Sean is joining us today with Ben Coulihan, Director of Pre-Construction. Ben oversees both pre-construction and estimating departments at NEI. He is also joined by Jessica Morrissey, Associate Director of Pre-Construction. Jessica manages pre-construction development and collaboration with project management. And also today is Chris Burke, General Superintendent, also a certified passive house builder. Chris is a construction expert who oversees half of NEI's Northeast projects. NEI is a privately held company committed to affordable housing with extensive experience in ground-up, moderate rehab, elderly, veteran, historic rehab, historic tax credit, and tax credit projects. NEI serves clients in the Northeast from the Boston office and now are setting foot in Vermont as well. Also serves the Southeast from their Florida office and the Southwest from their Texas office. NEI has demonstrated through their executed projects that the passive house standard can be achieved with a minimal incremental cost compared to conventional construction. So with that, Sean, you can take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that introduction. I can speak for my colleagues and I. We're very happy to be here today to present to you guys, and we appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this organization and to have the ability to speak with some of the influencers in this industry, in this location. So I will share my screen. So I think Enrique touched on, a lot of what NEI has to offer. Hopefully didn't take away all of our talking points, but we will get started with our presentation. So Enrique mentioned our project team here. Just quickly, Sean Henry, project manager with NEI. I'm currently managing two multifamily passive house projects in Massachusetts and an active member of Vermont Passive House. We also have Chris Burke here, General Superintendent with NEI. He oversees about half of our Northeast operation projects. And Jess and Ben are both from our pre-construction department and lead our integration with our design teams and our construction teams. Ben, do you want to talk a little bit more about NEI?
I have to say, after Enrique, you did a pretty good job of describing who we are. I think that's it in a nutshell. NEI, just to sort of give you some of the rough outline, we're about 25 years old. We have about 250 people, we do about 350 million a year. We've got 4 offices. One outside of Boston, one in outside of Orlando, and one in Texas, and one brand new open in Burlington, where Sean is right now. Our focus is affordable housing. That's really what we do. That's the bulk of our work. That's 90% of our work. We've done a lot of it. We've done probably 15,000 units of it in different new construction, mod rehab, and conversions. I think that's a pretty important point, because in many respects, a lot of our cost data is benchmarked on affordable housing projects, which doesn't necessarily mean they're more expensive, but that's something to keep in mind in what we do. So actually, a footnote, Enrique, you asked out of the gate about passive house projects. We've got about 10. We've got 2 completed, 3 under construction, or 4, and the balance in the pipeline. And I will concede that, we are working on a lot of passive house projects. Part of that is because of our experience and what we've done on the Finch and subsequent projects. But it also has to do with affordable housing. Affordable housing generally sponsors and projects are looking for more durable, energy efficient projects. So that market tends to lean towards passive house, which is one of the reasons why we're in this space. So,
Ben, just a second.
Sure.
Could you change the presentation mode to presentation?
Sorry about that.
You have it in.
I'm struggling here. I told everyone I knew what I was doing.
Okay.
That's not.
Okay, that's fine like that.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Go ahead. Sorry, Tom. Ben.
No problem. So one of the things we wanted to showcase is the amount of projects that are currently available under construction, in pre-construction in Massachusetts, and the hope is that that Vermont isn't too far off. And Ben touched on the Finch. We also have a number of other projects currently either under construction, in pre-construction, looking for funding. And one of the things that I've heard from my fellow Vermont passive house people is, kind of about the barriers to entry into Vermont. It seems like a perfect place for passive house projects, but I don't think the quantity of projects being considered or completed is where we'd want it to be. So one of the things I wanted to touch on is some of the myths that come with passive house construction, and maybe some of the barriers or proposed barriers to passive house construction. So from the general contractor side of things, we looked at the myths of passive house, and there's a few of them. We have a few listed here, but our workforce, the details are supposedly extremely complicated. The materials that we use are complicated, and what we're finding is that with education, with our training, and with our experience, we're able to prove that that's not the case. And I think we have experience in that from the actual construction side of things, but also the pre-construction side of things. So I think Jess is going to mention a few of the pre-construction items.
Working with subcontractors during pre-construction can greatly improve their understanding of the project and the product. They are the experts in their fields. So usually we're not asking them to do things that they don't know how to do. It's just taking the time to sit, talk it through, and make sure that they understand, what is being drawn and what is looking to be achieved.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And material availability is another item that is key to passive house. With some of the what maybe 5 or 10 years ago were called specialty materials, but now are becoming more and more readily available. And that's also something that we handle extensively in the pre-construction process.
Yeah, that is a big part of it, is making sure that we're making sure that what is specified is available within the construction timeline. If it's not, can we explore some alternates ahead of time and make sure that it works in the project? Because I don't know if you guys have the same issue too, not just on passive house products, but material availability in general has been a challenge. So it's certainly something that we focus on, because whether it's a passive house product or just electrical switchgear for a multifamily project, it's something that we really need to look at early in the process.
Yeah, and from the construction side, another thing that we key in on is talking with our owners, talking with our architects, and ensuring that we can get early review of critical products. And I would say if you're not working on a passive house job, that still happens, but it happens with fewer pieces of equipment. So on a passive house project, you might be asking the architect to review and approve a whole list of items, insulation, windows, storefront assemblies, thermally broken doors, those sorts of items. And working with your team, your design team, and your ownership group to ensure that that material can be available when you need it is a key component. But it's something that we're already doing. We just do it at a slightly larger scale on a passive house project.
And then obviously there's the cost factor of the materials. Again, we look at these during the different phases of pre-construction. If something that's specified is not necessarily working within the budget, we will explore alternatives. Find out, will they work? How do they affect the model? Can they get here in time? And then collaboratively, we can make a decision based on cost and availability. What is the best material for the specific project?
And the material availability kind of ties into the construction duration. We need to be upfront with our developers and our owners and our architects on how long this material is going to take to arrive in order to set realistic construction durations. And what we like to say a lot is that we don't believe that passive house construction takes any longer than normal construction. If you're doing your normal construction well, it should take just as long as passive house construction. There should be checks and balances put in place, milestone events in your standard construction process, your standard construction schedule. And we don't believe that it equates to really a noticeable difference in time and duration. So some more myths and items that we've identified. Chris Burke, our general superintendent, has worked on a number of passive house projects and has intimate knowledge of detail review and detail development.
Yeah, so a big part in the field is just making sure everything works, right? And working through it with the subs, like Jeff said, being proactive. They are the masters of their trades, and lines they'll line up on the drawings, but it doesn't necessarily mean they line up in the field. So we partner up with everybody. We'll do the mock-ups. We'll get through everything we need to, but the key is to take it in chunk. It can be overwhelming to look at everything at once, but we hit our milestones. So we'll start to do the mock-ups, and we use some examples here of tapes and wraps and spray adhesives. We may go through the window process, change out some of the products. On a project, we had one product that everybody seemed to like, but then we realized it didn't have the same properties that another product had that allowed more flexibility, which was Sega. You didn't need any primer with it. It's all the tapes that went with it were vapor open, things like that. So we kind of switched gears, and in that process, we were able to realize that there was more tapes needed or more tapes available from them rather than get into introducing caulking and sealants of that type. And once we had the mock-up done, then we started testing it, and it allowed us just to get it going in the field and start installing basically a live mock-up and work through the details. So a big part of that, though, is we had the rep from Sega with us. He came out, we looked at his different products. I've been to their shop since. They've created internal testing chambers, different materials coming out all the time, and just really partnering with these people and making sure that it works and documenting that process. And that way, once it's done and it's approved, we can more or less put it behind us in the sense that here's an approved submittal of how we want to do this. Now we can focus on the next phase and keep it simple and keep it in smaller chunks.
Absolutely. We know that the design teams, our architects and our passive house consultants have spent hours upon hours getting our projects pre-certified. And so the key that we tell our field teams, our project management teams, our subcontractors, is that follow the details as they're designed. It sounds simple. It is simple, but you'd be surprised how often, how often somebody might want to interpret a detail or adjust a detail. And the details are there because they are designed to meet passive house requirements. So our mantra is follow the details. And
Right.
Can I jump in there, Sean? I think that relative to details, probably in large part, some of the challenge is just, is adjusting old sensibilities about how things go together. Because a lot of the details, the essential details that, are necessary, and Chris has put it in place in the field, are really, they might be a little bit different than what folks may have been doing in the past, but they're not that different.
no, they're not.
Right. So a good example of that, right, when we started on the first job we did, which was Finch Cambridge, it was a new experience for everybody. All the subs, they hadn't seen passive house, and one particular sub came to us, he's like, look, I have legit concerns. I've never done passive house, I don't know anything about it. So I'm not sure that I could do it. It's like, okay, well, we obviously need to work through it together, and we'll figure out what we need to do. And if there's questions along the way, we'll get the right people involved to answer the questions. But at the end of the day, do you see anything wrong with these details? Can you achieve the details of it? And I believe it was the drywaller at the time. And so we're looking at like the sealants behind the drywall and how to caulk around the windows and things like that. And he was like, yeah, I don't see anything that really jumps out. And it's like, okay, well, the details are passive house. So if you achieve these details, then you've got passive house now. So we kind of put it at ease, and then, we'd set up our meetings and just work through specific areas and a lot of live mock-ups and things like that. And it's like, okay, this is what we're doing. And we understand what the issues are, and now we're ready to move forward.
Exactly. It's that initial fear of something new. And then as Ben mentioned, you actually look at how the details change, and there's not that much extra involved. Chris touched on this a little bit, but I just wanted to really mention this again because of its importance to the field team in the build of the projects. We have all this great technology in our materials now, and we have great manufacturers with technical support teams, and utilizing those teams, those manufacturers reps, has been critical to our successful installs. Whether your window rep is out there, or your exterior, your zip rep from Huber, or your siding rep, or your tape and adhesive and vapor barrier rep, utilizing those people with who are the experts in their field to provide you with insight in your installation and problem solving details before you even start is a way that we keep it simple. It may sound like an extra step, but it removes a lot of that fear and uncertainty from the process. And I keyed in on a key word there, the process. The process is it's constant. It's a constant process. And the way we look at it is there's the pre-construction process and then during construction, and then the completion. Obviously, that's the same on every job. What we find with passive house and our success with passive house is how often those the parts and pieces within that, the design team, the raters and verifiers, the ownership group, the builders themselves, the subs, how often we're going back and forth in a consistent loop of check, define something, ask your question, verify in the field, and show completion. And I think that view from a GC, this collaborative process, this collaborative endeavor from start to finish, constantly renewing the loop is key. It is the process that leads to success. Ben or Jess, do you have anything from a pre-construction standpoint on that process?
Oh, want to go?
I can jump in. I think that you're right. It is a rinse and repeat process. This is not the type of project, and it's whether it's passive house or any kind of high performance or really any kind of quality built project is not something you can wind up, document, and then let it go. It's something that you have to be working from start to finish, and that's not just from a detailing perspective, whether it's coordinating details. It's exactly what Jess described. It's, checking materials, its availability. Those are not constants. Those will change. And in the development arcs of these projects, whether it's, 6 months, a year, 18 months, those are going to continually change. So it's a continual process of providing feedback and adjusting and kind of tweaking the knobs as you go. And even into construction, Chris and his team in the field are doing that every day. Same thing, availability, detailing, feedback to the A&E team, making adjustments. So.
And a good part of doing that, throughout the whole process, I mean, let's face it, I'll speak for myself, but if there's an issue, it's a lot easier to look at it right in front of you than it is to, try to understand it, looking at paper, pictures, things like that. So having those reoccurring meetings and going out there and say, this is where the issue is, and you're standing in the room, say, this is, we see this being a problem. I think it leads for opportunity for, both the design team and the subs to hone in on how to do it correctly and efficiently, and then you can apply it. That in this photo, I believe that's a 100-unit building, right? So if you do everything, if you find that issue there, then you can apply it to 100 units and you get it behind you quicker.
Yeah, and in that collaboration with the design team, in particular, the passive house raters and verifiers, I would say that's one of the biggest differences is the, you might have an exterior envelope consultant, you have your architect, you have your engineers, but having the passive house rater and verifier on board and in communication with you is so critical. Our superintendents out in the field might talk to the rater and verifier as often as they talk to the architect themselves.
Right.
And in that loop of communication, discussion, problem solving is the key. So another thing we wanted to talk about was, connecting the technology that we have now to the skill that we have in the field. So connecting the technology to the trade. And we've had some good experience with, subcontractor selection for specific scopes, where you can, as a GC, you can help better set up your sub for success. And we have a few examples of that, but and Chris will touch on one, but the use of specialty tradesmen is key. There are people out there who just do waterproofing, and that might not have been the case or might not have been needed on projects in the past, but now your waterproofing, your vapor barrier, your insulation install, sub slab are so important that you need to search out and find these specialty tradesmen.
So an example of this, what we've seen on several jobs now is we've geared more towards taking the exterior envelope and handing that over to, the sidewall, the siding sub. They'll only install the windows. They'll only install the AVB, trim all the tapes and caulkings needed, and the siding as well. In a typical construction job, the windows and the AVB may be bought out with a framer. This allows them to take it to the substrate, accept the substrate, then move forward and apply all the different layers that are such an important part of passive house, right? So that sequence has helped us. And then, even go inside, do the MEPs, right? We've taken some of it out of sequence so that we can pre-test properly, so that we get to a better comfort level before we move forward. Because again, we're, with construction, we're trying to maintain a schedule. We want to get the project turned over, but with all the checks and balances in place for a passive house project, it's important to resequence some of the stuff And ultimately, you'll gain speed in the end. It may be a little bit different, but what we found is it hasn't been too bad. It's just it's another milestone in our schedule, and we'll work to it to that point. And then, you know, say like HVAC, we may put the trunk line up, cap it off, test it, then bring in the passive house rater to test it to get the numbers that they need. And then we'll go back and we'll finish in our rough, and then we'll do the insulation and things like that. Whereas, you know, before it'd just be a complete install, finish it, and then test it at the end. So the out of sequence work definitely helps. It's not a huge impact, but like I said, it's a good checks and balance along the way. So you're not creating a systemic problem without knowing it.
And the insulation part, Chris, that you mentioned is key. You know, the MEPs on a typical job are used to insulating their own duct, insulating their own piping.
Right.
But the use of specialty insulators, I think, is super critical. And it's something that I've had on my current passive house project, where a dedicated insulator will come in for duct wrap, for piping, hot, cold distribution, you know, piping, and
Right.
really perform it to the standard of a specialized installer.
And within passive house, insulation has to meet that level 1 grade, right? Yeah. So having that specialty trade that understands, you know, on the exterior, you may have an R30 wall, but then you're going to turn around and put Roxol on the outside face of it. Those seams have to be nice and tight, and it needs to be fluffy. It needs to be not compressed or cut around things. So understanding that and doing it right the first time and getting the inspection and being done it's definitely it's an important part of this piece, to have the right person putting the right piece in.
Absolutely. Further to, you know, some of our lessons learned. I mean, I think we've talked about this already extensively over the beginning of our presentation. Is its coordination. It's that process, that circular process of it doesn't matter if you're a sub, the owner, an architect, the rater verifier, the consultant. Is the coordination is more critical during a passive house construction than anything else. You need subs on board attending kickoff meetings for their activities with the rater verifier, whether that's drywall, whether that's sub slab insulation, whether that's your roofing subcontractor. All of those elements are key. And, you know, reoccurring meetings will have, usually our rater verifier will provide us with a milestone checklist. Prior to construction starting, we provide that to all of our subs. We know ahead of time where our checkpoints are, you know, so you schedule around those checkpoints. And on all the projects I'm working on, the consultant and the rater verifier are also at our weekly owners meetings. So all keys, all the coordination is key to the process. We identified, we wanted to share, you know, one unique item from the Finch Cambridge project. It's a project that I think a lot of people I've heard are aware of. I know Enrique and I were talking about it before this got kicked off. It's a well-known project, an award-winning project, and Chris was heavily involved in the construction of that project. So he's going to kind of walk us through you know, one of the passive house issues that we had to coordinate and work through.
Yeah, so this project, I believe, was certified under 2015. So there were components of the building that were in and out of the passive house. So if you look at this photo to the right of that column, that was outside the passive house. Well, not only was it outside the passive house, but it's also on the exterior wall. So as we're sitting there, we're looking at this project that was certified after it had started. You know, we realized that we had some conditions there that may create, you know, thermal bridging and things like that. So, you know, we went through different products, worked with the architect, worked with, you know, our consultants, and came up with a way to, you know, make sure that the columns and the beams that were on the exterior wall were insulated properly, just by switching out some of the products. And, it's just an opportunity for us to make sure as we get closer to the whole building test that we weren't having any issues. So, that came up on a walkthrough. We were looking at it and then, transitioned into the garage a little bit. We had a parking underneath with a double podium. So we were able to catch it before it was an issue. So worked out well.
The project I'm currently working on is the Holbrook Center Senior Housing. It's in Holbrook, Massachusetts. It's a 72 unit, 4-story wood construction, about 67,000 square feet. And through the process of material selection, pre-construction coordination, material selection, detail review, we were able to identify key components, key areas to review and confirm, check and confirm prior to our blower door test. So I have here the results of our midpoint blower door test. So we at this point we didn't even have all the siding on the building, and we had rough openings at the exterior that were boarded up and taped, where we didn't have storefront yet. And the point I want to make with this slide is kind of to go back to the simplicity and the difficulty level. That's kind of the myth of Passive House. One of the myths with Passive House, in my opinion, is that even with all of these items, partially installed, we were still able to meet the requirements of our midpoint blower door test. We're about 3 weeks away from our final blower door test. But I'm expecting nothing but better results at this point now that storefronts are in, caulked, taped, sealed correctly, and we have a complete building. But it's not impossible if you follow the details, you coordinate with your team, your design team, your subs. You can achieve the results that are desired, that are required. And now what everyone wants to know.
Save the best for last.
Yeah.
This was quite a lead up to the actual question at hand, is how much does all of this cost? And we have an answer, but I'm not sure that it is going to be as specific as maybe you're looking for. And it is a little bit strange to sort of promote ourselves as the expert and say, we've worked on a lot of these projects, we've completed it, we know what we're doing, we know the process, and then turn around and say, well, it's tricky, it's complicated. But it really is. And really, Jess and I we could talk about this for days on end, construction pricing relative to our projects and Passive House projects. The really short, concise answer is it's about 2%. And that's reflective in some of the hard cost considerations that Jess will touch on. But the reality is you really need to keep that in perspective, because construction pricing is not that, in many respects, it's an equation. It's very simple arithmetic, A plus B plus C, and you get the product of it. But the more of those A plus Bs, the more variables, the more constants you add to that equation, the more it gets a little bit more difficult to distill out what the exact cost is. And we point out here that there are a number of other factors, basically project priorities, what the actual design is. Sometimes funders, regulatory agencies have specific requirements, site-specific requirements. All of these can move a project by more than generally the Passive House details can, which can be frustrating sometimes because, across the arc of a project, we might price it at different intervals, from an early phase, a mid phase, and then as we're going into construction. And sometimes you need to be aware of these things, because some lines, some trades, the value of the project can move a little bit, kind of disconnected, completely untethered from the Passive House requirements. So That's generally where we are. That's generally what we see in our market. It's also, as I said in the beginning, has a little bit to do with the type of work that we do. We're doing affordable housing. We're doing high performance buildings. So it's also, there's not really a good datum to measure from because you're not measuring a passive house, multifamily, 40 unit building against something that's got, coal-fired furnaces. Whether they're passive house or not, they're going to be high performance. They're going to be all electrified. They're going to be thermally tight. They're going to be well insulated buildings. Because our owners, their sponsors are looking for very durable, long-lasting, energy efficient products. So those are all the qualifications of how we kind of calculate this. I might touch briefly on general conditions as well, where the majority of these upticks in cost relate to hard cost. There sometimes is an uptick for supervision. And I want to carefully frame this one as well, because it has almost entirely to do with how the supervision and management of a project is organized. Because simply because a project is passive housing does require a little more focus and intent doesn't necessarily mean that you have to add people. That depends on how, what your on-site team looks like, how big the project is. As projects are more and more complex these days, it is incumbent on a builder who's putting in place quality work to be mindful and to keep an eye on things. So you might have in your, on site, a couple of assistant supers, a couple of supers anyway, given the size and scale and the type of project. Their focus might move a little bit if it's a passive house versus not a passive house, from one QA QC aspect to another. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be more staffing on a project. There might be. And so maybe to you, Jess, on hard cost considerations.
Sure. So we wanted to outline these as considerations. They are generally the items that may have some upticks associated with passive house, but also keep in mind all the things that Ben just went over as well that may also impact these hard costs that kind of may affect the pricing, but not be directly related to passive house. But as Chris mentioned, where the passive house envelope is a good example. What are the intersecting materials there? So are there premiums for some additional work required to make sure that the thermal bridging is addressed? Windows is a big one, or I guess glazing in general, because exterior storefront is on that list as well. The more electrification of all your mechanical systems, which down here in Boston is a very big push and part of the process. But all of these things should be looked at from that lens of consideration. There's different ways to review, say, an exterior wall assembly and maybe potentially redesign it so it still fits the model, but provides some cost benefit to the project as a whole. I think with that, we wanted to open it up to questions, unless anyone else has anything else to add.
I'm good.
Also,
Who has questions for the NEI team? Are there any in the chat? Craig.
Yeah, thanks. That was great. I just have a few. I have a question on your process, but before I ask that question, I just wanted to ask a few building questions. Do you guys use aero barrier at all to get, or is it all traditional air sealing methods?
That's a great question. Mixed answer. Chris?
Okay. We don't need to spend a lot of time. Yeah, just the highlights of your experience with it would be helpful.
so most of the projects that I've seen on, on the outside, we're doing a peel and stick. On the inside, it's a combination of caulking and then we'll also spray. So we will do
Spray meaning aero barrier?
Yeah, well, Hilti makes a product. Sean, what was the other one we just used? I can't think of the name.
The STI product.
STI. Yeah. So
Yep.
rather than go through and try to caulk, fire tape and stuff like that, we're actually sending it through a paint sprayer with, engineering judgment to get the proper ratings and things like that. So.
Okay. And are your wall systems tend to be cavity with exterior continuous? Is that generally what you're building?
Yes.
And are you guys using, what level windows are you using down there? CU value typically?
Project specific.
Yeah.
Like
definitely
where are
It's
you, are
usually
you in the
detailed.
teens though? Are you in the teens? Or are you in the low 20? Like where do you need to get to? Like U value, are you are you in the real low teen? Are you needing to get to the like mid and low teen, like 0.1, 0.4, 1.4? Triple glazed, you guys know?
Look at. Oh, definitely triple glazed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
We can get back to you on that U value.
okay,
Yeah.
all right. And I guess that's the other one was DHW. How are you guys, how are you doing your DHW on your double loaded quarter buildings?
We did the current project I'm on has a central boiler system and then distribution from there.
So so that is a non-electrified component?
Correct.
Okay,
We have some
that's-
we have some in the pipeline that are electrified.
Yeah, because we're struggling with that too. We're going electric on heating, obviously cooling. And are you guys using the floor-based ERVs in your double loaded quarter buildings as opposed to individual or whole building?
We have both. We have
Yeah.
both.
Both whole building and floor-based?
Both
Well, I
types. Yeah.
Both types.
Right, but
Depending
not
upon the
even-
project.
One project may have individual ERV
Right.
units and then more central for common spaces.
Mhm.
Another building might have all central for units and common, so we see that both ways.
Okay. Thank you. And the process question I had was your pre-development staff, so you put the slide up, I think 2 of you are on this pre-development. You have your project team broken out that way. I was wondering if you just spend a couple more minutes explaining that piece of it and how you guys are set up and when you talk about how important it is to have the rater looped in, and like, if you could just explain a little more how your project team is broken up between the staff people that focus on pre-development.
Sure. I think the rater comes in when boots are on the ground and dirt is being moved. Ben and I handle the pre-development portion, but loop in Chris Burke and Sean Henry during our pre-construction, our pricing efforts at different points of that, because they will provide some constructability insights, some schedule insights, items like that as well from their experiences on the projects that they're currently on.
But what are you doing? I guess my question is, like, we don't have people, I would say, on our teams that have a title that's pre-development. You know what I mean? We have a project management team, we have developer who handles the budget side, and then project manager and an architecture team. Like, our design teams don't have somebody with that title. So that's what I'm trying to zone. Why did you create that title?
Well, that's a good question. And it really, I mean, like anything, it really depends on the project. We have lots of owners and sponsors that have fairly sophisticated or moderately sophisticated construction teams, and some that don't. That's really why there are 2 of us. There's a Jess and a me, because we're scalable, and we might invest more in a project that needs more construction support in the beginning. But that's really, I mean, the role is to sort of bridge the gap between the A&E team and the owner and the construction team, and to be sort of the, air traffic control for, our internal resources as well as external resources. Because sometimes you need to, we need to be asking questions. We need to be engaging the A&E team, the architects, engineers, the raters. We can, actively participating. So, that's generally where the role comes from. And how much time, what is involved, what does it look like? It really depends on who we're engaging and, where we are in the project too, because that's a slightly different effort if we're in, schematic or, early DD versus something that is, ready to get, put out to bid or get into the ground. Generally earlier in the project, there's more us and we're tapping, project manager, project executive, superintendents, things like that, as needed. And as we get deeper into the project, we are shepherding them more into the process and connecting them more with the team.
Going back to your question on domestic hot water, Craig, there is a very interesting project in Philadelphia done by Tim McDonald of Onion Flats. And it's all electric, including domestic hot water. And it's with they put the water heat pump water heaters in the basement. They basically zone them for one water heater for each 2 apartments, and they are using Viega kind of distribution pipe system that really solved the problem of they have with distribution. So if you want to have some more information on that, I can give it to you.
Yeah, that would be good.
Craig, I did look up your U-value question. And the data that I had collected on some of our recent projects is there in like the mid-teens.
Okay, your
mostly.
window.
I mean, I think we had one that was, over that, but probably a good.
That's perfect for Vermont.
Okay, thank you guys very much. I don't want to, I could keep asking questions, but I want to let other folks ask.
Okay, there is another question from Lori. Do you want to ask it yourself or do you want me to ask it? You can go ahead and, yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to, thanks. And the reason I'm asking is my company provides the metal and flat stock for fabricated metal roof and wall systems. We're doing 4 and 5, possibly 6 projects in the Hudson Valley right now, passive house. And so my question for NEI was, what is the frequency that they're finding that design material in the design of the passive houses they've done?
I'd say there's been an evolution to different types of different types of exterior cladding materials in a lot of the projects. We have done a number of projects in Metro Boston, and those are getting much more sophisticated these days with exterior metal systems and shingle systems and varied sort of facades that have several different components to them.
Right, different textures and materials are being utilized more than prior.
And I think even the suburban projects that we're working on are seeing more variation. I think they're not all just hardy anymore. And I think that's probably for a couple of reasons. For one is that you've got products that are, just commercially available and subs are familiar with them. But also, there is an intent, again, from our owners and sponsors to try and build something long-lasting, durable, and sustainable. So they're interested, they're open. Perfect question for the pre-construction process that we engage all the time. I think that we price cladding materials probably second only to mechanical systems in terms of, what can we afford? Can we do this? How about this? Let's keep that as an option. Let's, so.
Right, playing around with what goes on what elevation, perhaps, depending on how, especially in the more, tight communities, where you might not see one of the elevations as much because it's adjacent to another building. We can get creative with the cladding, have a more front facade that's a little bit more showy than the rest.
Any other questions? I have a couple of mine too, but want to leave the floor for anybody that wants to ask any questions. That incremental cost that you show there in your cost evaluation from the 2% to 5 or 10%, is that something that happens also with regular projects? I mean, due to customer preferences or regulations or things like that? Or is that something that it's only related to passive house?
No, it's really, and this is in part why it's so complicated to kind of, distill out exactly what the premium is for passive house. Generally, what we find is there are far more issues that are going to move that number than passive house. And it happens on all projects. I don't think that passive house is it's certainly not alone in that. I think it's fair to say that it's really a four-dimensional challenge, because you've got these factors that are on the project that can kind of push and pull in different ways, and it really changes each of those nodes along the process, the project. In the tax credit world, tax credit projects, we generally, owners, sponsors, are having to kind of plant a flag on a budget and a scope and hold that longer than many other types of projects, because they're seeking funding. They're in a queue. It's a longer sort of a development arc and closing arc. Those projects all are really challenged, or they can be really challenged, because you've got a project you've got a static budget, but it's moving through time, and it's moving through the market. The market's moving, market's doing its own thing. Material, changes, escalations are doing their own thing. And so that's why it's so important, throughout the process, to kind of keep turning those dials as best you can. Jess and I, all the time, we say, whenever we get asked if the passive house premium, the real answer is it could be zero. It could be zero, because generally there are other factors in a project that could move the project cost
much more
so. And in fact, to sort of put it in a little bit more sort of a more granular context, if we're putting this out on the street and we're bidding this competitively to subs, a decent sub market, all capable subs, the spread we're going to see in the lines, say in the major trades, the MEP trades, rough, things like that, the spread between subs themselves is probably going to be 4, 5, 6%. It could vary that much, depending upon, their own availability, their own capacity, lots of other factors. So sub pricing alone can sometimes, further aggravate a project, as well as it can mitigate, some of these cost increases.
Thank you. Craig, you want to go ahead and ask one of your many questions? Or...
Yeah, if no one else has, Chris, does Chris have a question? I see his.
Yeah, I have a comment to make, and everybody online here, great presentation, you guys too. Everybody online here knows that the benefits of passive house in multifamily come during occupancy and after construction. And we all know this in terms of maintenance, heating and cooling costs, turnover rates decrease, the amount of money a developer has to spend on maintenance and upgrading units. People stay longer, they're comfortable, they're happy, they love their apartments. And that if we can look ahead to that 5 to 10 years of occupancy and operating costs after the passive house multifamily is completed, isn't that when the benefits come down the line to the developer owner?
Well, It's a good question. I guess it's in many respects, it depends on who the owner is. If it's a long-term operator or it's or not or short-term. The work that we do, generally folks are invested in long-term operations.
Right.
So absolutely, they do see that. And that's a really important point in that early process and throughout the process where you're making decisions. Those decisions are not all first cost decisions. Some of them have, incredibly profound long-term effects. And it's something that really is why the sort of the early pricing and that sort of collaborative effort is really, it involves everybody, the A&E team, because we can price things, 100 different ways. We can give you 50 different, exterior envelope materials or insulation strategies on the exterior of the building. But how does that actually impact operations and the thermal calculations? We need the A&E team to weigh in on those decisions. These are not, the sort of the classic value engineering
Right.
decisions. We can always find, we're not replacing an apple for an apple. It's not a Fiji for a Cortland. But you're absolutely right. It's incumbent on the A&E team to really help and participate and help provide some insight into what that road looks like,
Right.
further out.
Yep.
Craig, you had another one?
Are you guys able to stay on for a few minutes longer? I'm sure people are going to have to start dropping off.
Yeah, we can
Do
start.
you want to wrap up with anything, Enrique, and then keep?
No.
these
You
guys
can
stay on?
you can go ahead. I mean,
But I mean, do you want
if,
to? Do you and
if
Chris
some
want to
people
say
have
anything?
to, if
Okay,
people
all right,
have
I'll
to
just keep
leave,
going.
then we'll understand that. But we can we can stay here for a couple of more minutes.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious what you got. I mean, basically, where we're at generally is we have been doing a lot of what you guys are doing for the past decade. And what happened is we did the second passive house in New England. That certification was a little rocky. There's been cost considerations, which are, basically what we're not doing that you guys are doing is triple glazed windows and just a little bit more wall insulation.
Mhm.
That's where we would need to get to. And that's where we've been for over 5 years now. Our buildings are meeting passive house. All of our new construction is meeting passive house air sealing. And I was just wondering where what is your certification cost been running? You guys know that? Not the delta on the 2%, but just does anybody know that off the top of your head?
I
Good
don't.
question.
To pay
Yeah.
the
Good question.
raters and everybody?
We don't, so we wouldn't typically have those consultants under us.
Yeah.
We probably could, actually, that's an interesting question. And you know what, let us circle back with you on that, because from our own perspective, the things that we do that would probably be relatively unique is that we generally do our own blower door pre-tests and things like that.
Yeah.
We do, we work with folks, our own consultants.
Right.
We work with New Ecology all the time.
Right.
On our cost. So let us think about that. And we could probably put together roughly what we are investing. Now, I wouldn't say that's necessarily what's required
Right.
for Achievable. That's probably, that's probably what our own process looks like. And as I say this out loud, it probably has more to do with just how we staff jobs. I mean, we generally have a little more attention or focus on QA/QC. So, but let us circle back on that. That's a good question.
I think a great deal of the passive house certification cost is covered by the mass safe incentives. For a building of 30 apartments, you can have about $150,000 of mass savings, which is basically the same thing that you can have here in the Champlain Valley in the Vermont Gas Services territory. For the same 30 apartments, you can have $100,000 incentives. So I don't know if people are looking into that in here, or because that's the area probably where most of the multifamily projects are happening, and
Right.
also affordable housing. So I think in Massachusetts, a lot of that cost is just covered by the incentives.
Mhm. Mhm.
In my
Yeah.
understanding, maybe I'll chime in here real quick, is in Massachusetts and Connecticut, a lot of developers, have invested in that first project and gone through certification, and then they just incorporate those energy modeling specs and assemblies into a cookie cutter then the next one
Yeah.
is kind of cookie cutter done the same. So those investments don't come in all of your projects, but maybe in one or two, and then you just go with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. I think that's kind of some of the stuff that Chris outlined as far as
Uh-huh.
lessons learned that we learned on the Finch, and some of the first ones really became,
Right.
monumental for bettering the process and getting us where we are today.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
your costs for passive house multifamily start to decrease.
Yeah. Do you guys happen to know what your EUI, does Massachusetts have EUI targets in their code? Because I'll tell you, that's what Vermont is now focused on. So that's what we're right now, our best buildings are in the 30s, low 30s, and we have to get down
Six
to.
of the major cities, including Boston in Massachusetts, are mandating passive house certification for 12,000 square feet and up.
Mm,
Right.
yeah,
So
it's
that's,
part of the new stretch code.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so they're saying if you're passive house certified, that's what I thought.
It's a path to
It's
meet
a path to meet
to meet the stretch code that
Yeah.
is being implemented.
I'd be really curious, as I said at the beginning of the call, just where I don't even know if there's any Efficiency Vermont folks on this call, but my colleagues there, we've been talking to a lot about trying to get, that's our energy efficiency utility in the state, is getting performance data in our climate zone, which is, you guys are one climate zone away, but still getting that EUI data, your performance data, lessons learned on your mechanicals, how much energy your buildings are using over the next couple of years is going to be super helpful to us as we move forward. Because whether or not people in our development community don't want to do any third-party certification such as passive house, we are going to get performance. The state's moving towards performance levels that are bringing us there, because we need to get down into the 20s. And those are NBI numbers that are advising our public service department. And I don't know that that's in Vermont, the goal is to get there by 2030, which is 3 more code cycles. Like Enrique and Chris would say, and a lot of others that I work with, that's, we should be doing it right now. And, I don't disagree with that, but I don't make all the rules. And there's a lot of pushback there's a lot of cost concerns and things like that. And what you're actually, I think also personally, I don't know how you guys feel about this, but, I don't know that Windows is a tough one, because Windows also has a comfort component. And I don't know that Windows are always captured well in the modeling, because different models that we're running really doesn't show a huge benefit to triple glaze, as I think probably there actually is. But that's just me talking. And I've talked to a lot of the energy people about this, but that's why it's not penciling out necessarily to go into the teens. And when we're struggling for every single dollar, that's one of the issues here. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time and coming to talk to us.
Yeah, Craig, let's stay in touch. And I think there's some ways Enrique and I can help you. Your colleagues at Efficiency Vermont should be talking to FIAS and trying to get some climate data studies from other parts of the northern United States, and we could help with that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
The U value depends mainly on the height of the window. I mean, you can get away with lower or higher, U values if your window is shorter. But the Fuse, for example, has a risk, a condensation risk calculator that you can use depending on the size of the window and the frame and things like that. So that's something that you can go ahead. I don't know which calculator are you using to calculate that comfort you're talking about, Craig.
Well, that's like, if you talk to Chris West, it's not so much the fenestration losses, it's the comfort that's always going to drive triple glaze to meet the passive house requirements. And that's where it's not, you're not necessarily seeing it in the energy savings necessarily. But
Correct.
Passive house has it partly for their comfort issues, which
Correct.
is understandable.
And condensation risk.
And condensation, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which again ties into resiliency and sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely.
If a window has less condensation risk, there's going to be less maintenance on that window in terms of painting and cleaning and mold.
Yep.
You know, and the window is going to be more sustainable and resilient. It's going to last longer.
Mhm.
Everything around the fenestration around the window.
Mhm.
So, not to mention, you know, the occupants are going to be more comfortable and they're going to love their apartment. There's going to be less turnover rates, which apparently factors in big to the cost to an owner developer over time. Because every time someone moves, you have to redo the apartment. You know, there's upgrades and maintenance issues. But anyway.
Also, not only the resilience of, I mean, from the standpoint of maintenance, but also it implies resilience from the standpoint of maintaining the temperature and power losses events.
That's right. The BTUs in that room are going to be less. Yeah.
Which are becoming more and more frequent here.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to, if there are no more further questions, I don't want to hold
everybody,
NEI team anymore. Thank you very much. I appreciate very much.
Thank you for your time.
Great information. And it's great to have you here in Vermont. We hope to have many projects with you in the future.
Oh, sounds great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time, everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks.
Now.